I know this must say something about my personality. Maybe it's the guilt my parents used to keep me in line as a child, or maybe it's just my nature. All I know is that even as a child, there were nights when I woke up with the worst nightmare, as if I had committed some terrible crime and it was only a matter of time before they came for me. I knew I was guilty, I knew the evidence was there, and I knew I would be caught. My heart was pounding frantically, and I rose abruptly from a dead sleep and struggled to get back to sleep. The funny thing is, I don't have dreams like that anymore. When I met my wife, she was sweet and loving. She giggled when I made jokes, and she won my mom over from the first time they met. We were married for 12 years, and everything was fine for the first few years until about 6 months after our first child, a daughter, was born. That's when she started to change. It happened gradually at first and took a few years. 2 years later, we had our second child, a son. This seemed to cement her new character, and it got worse every year. She became irritable towards me and snapped at the children. Let's just say motherhood was not satisfying for my wife. I tried to talk to her about it more times than I can remember, but these attempts only led to arguments that she would stir up herself. Eventually, I gave up trying to fix a marriage that had been destroyed by unknown forces, and we lived 2 parallel lives. If you asked me what I did to deserve this, I couldn't answer. She was just an unhappy woman, never satisfied with what she had, and always striving for more. As the children grew up, she found more and more reasons not to be home. These were her distractions, and as the years went by, they became more and more. I would come home from work and pass my wife in the hallway as she headed for the exit. "You need to make dinner, I'm leaving." Big surprise. It got to the point where I took those words as a gift. The nights she left, the house was quiet. The nights she stayed home angered me. I cooked most dinners and did the shopping. I knew what was in the refrigerator and planned meals for the week. As the kids got older, they started to gravitate toward me as I became both mother and father to them. You know, that's just wrong. A father expects his children to greet him cheerfully when he comes home, but he knows that the center of their lives is their mother. My children seemed to hide in their rooms until I came home and then burst out to play with their father. I felt like I didn't know her anymore. Her mother had cheated on her father and turned her cheating into a way of life. My wife saw what it did to him. His wife threatened to take the kids away, so he stayed and suffered until they left for college, and then he left. My wife saw the pain of her mother's betrayal and vowed she would never be her mother. It was another broken vow. The beginning of the end came one evening in late March. The children had already gone to bed, and my wife walked into the living room to utter those words that have made the blood run cold for generations of husbands. "David, we need to talk." She didn't even call me honey. Like a school teacher mentoring a misbehaving child, she explained to me that she would start spending nights with her lover. This was not news to me, and as with her nightly dates, I accepted the news with relief. In my wife's case, less was definitely more. I had long since switched to sleeping in the guest room, and her absence would only reduce the stress in our lives. At first, I thought she took my agreement as a victory, but before she left the room, I thought I caught a note of disappointment. Did she want to hurt? Did she want me to beg her to stay on track? In my opinion, she was simply acknowledging what I had long known, and like her father, I was staying for my children until they grew up and left home. The next few months became the new normal, and my children didn't even ask where their mother was. Did she tell them? I doubt it. I think they were as excited as I was. Spring came, and I went about the usual chores that come with warm weather. We spent Saturday, me and my kids, doing some spring cleaning, airing out the house, dusting and polishing it. Now my wife had started spending weekends away from home, and I made that decision. My 2 children worked hard that day, and I was proud of them as only a parent can be. In the evening, we celebrated our hard work with cheeseburgers and root beer drinks. In the weeks that followed, I did things the kids were too young for. I rehung the shutters that the hurricane had ripped off the house. After opening the windows to the warm spring air, I repainted the living room and dining room, as well as the hallway. I replaced the exterior siding boards that were losing their resistance to rot. and replaced some weather stripping that had outlived its usefulness. Together, we prepared the garden for summer. We became a family of 3. I do my best to maintain the house, but there are some tasks I don't accomplish. Every fall, I have professionals come in to clean the furnace, and every spring, I call a septic tanker to drain the septic tank. It's probably the worst job on the planet. They dig up some turf to open the lid, and then they lower a big hose into the tank of foul water and suck it dry. Even on my worst workday, I have to do better than that. They're doing a pretty good job of restoring the section of the yard where the septic tank lid was dug out, but the dirt and crumpled sod is still visible for a few weeks. That was the following Friday night. I knew the kids were away for the weekend at their grandparents' house. I had long ago informed my parents of my wife's activities, and they felt it was their duty to give their grandchildren a weekend getaway to make the kids feel loved. My children adored their grandparents. When I returned home, I expected to see an empty house and a quiet evening, but I was greeted by something very different. Sitting in the living room was my wife and her latest distraction. She was flaunting her affair, and he was drinking my good scotch. I didn't care about the affair, but the scotch pissed me off. I stood in front of them while she giggled, he giggled, and then the lecture started. He is going away for the weekend, and they will be sleeping in what used to be our bed. She explained that I could watch if I wanted to, and for some reason, I found it terribly amusing. As she talked, it finally dawned on me that she seemed to have a need to systematically reinforce her betrayal year after year, as if she no longer got a high from existing attempts to belittle me and had to find new and more exciting ways to destroy me. I wondered where this would lead, as if the question represented some abstract academic exercise. I felt nothing for her and almost no pain from her betrayal, but wondered what I needed to do to protect my children. I didn't answer anything. I suppose she thought I was at a loss for words, becoming submissive and amazed at the depth of her depravity. But really, I was trying to decide if I cared. I had long since resigned myself to the fact that the woman I had married was dead. She stood up, threw off her dress in front of me, exposing her nakedness, and laughingly walked up the stairs to her bedroom. He walked beside her and snatched my dinner out of my hands. I was probably a wuss at that moment, but I had come to the conclusion that both she and her toys were so despicable that they weren't worth confronting. At least I would have ignored them if he hadn't done one more thing I couldn't ignore. He punched me as he walked by. He laughed, and a switch went off inside me. I have thought back to that moment many times and wondered why I let one act change everything. I didn't care that he slept with my wife. She was nothing to me. She was already used goods. He could have even taken my dinner. I would have gone out instead and spent the weekend with the kids. But the slap was the last straw. I sat back in my chair and started planning. I listened to their first round, and I was sure they were intentionally making moaning and screaming noises. It was all for my benefit and supposed humiliation. I continued to plan as the sun went down. There was a bat lying by the door. This would be quick and quiet. They proceeded to round 2. Not satisfied with my lack of response, they shouted even louder. I clarified my plans. I had plastic sheets from the garage that I used for paint wipes and old canvas sheets that I used to soak up small paint splatters. I knew I could be almost certain of my secrecy tonight. The moon had set and the sky was overcast. With no starlight and the house lights off, I could work in the dark. Taking a shovel from the garage and distracting the love seat, I removed the sod, trying to keep it as intact as possible. Then I dug into the ground and uncovered the septic tank. Round 3 began well past midnight. With the noise of their exaggerated passions masking my efforts, I took the bat by the door and tested my swing so as not to hit the ceiling. When I was ready, I climbed the stairs and made my way down the hall to her bedroom. How mundane. They were doing it missionary style. For all their noise, I might have thought they were more adventurous. Without warning, I smacked him in the back of the head, sealing his head into hers. He went out, and she groaned in a very different way than she had a few seconds before. A second blow from above, and she fell silent. I was lucky. I didn't fracture their skulls, just rendered them unconscious. I bound their arms and legs with lightning bolts, though they never regained consciousness as I quickly completed my task. I was now determined. One by one, I carried them outside. The first one I took first. As his head hovered over the open tank, I cut his throat and lowered him into the mud with more of a clatter than a splash. It was the second one, and for a moment I hesitated. Memories flashed through my mind of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the date and the night I'd proposed to her. I remembered how we stood together before God and family, how we made vows to each other, and then I slit her throat and threw her into the darkness with her lover. Last, I dipped the knife into the tank, not wanting to risk not being able to clean the blood off the hinge or the blade. I closed the tank, shook out the dirt on the lid, and carefully laid the sod until the ground looked like it had before. Not trusting my shirt, I burned it in the fire pit in the backyard. I showered, washed my clothes, and dressed. Once I was done with the dirty chores, I grabbed a flashlight and began to inspect every inch of the bed, hallway, and stairs. After about 2 weeks, I remembered the shovel and the dirty business of slitting throats. You always forget something. I found blood on the handle, so I burned the wood and rinsed the steel in bleach before I scrapped it. Before sunrise, I had one more task to complete. I took his keys, drove the car to the worst part of town, and left it there. I walked back and threw the keys into the sewer, starting about a mile from where I left the car. It was a long walk on a dark night, but I went unnoticed. After all, I was just another person on a street of faceless people. When the sun came up, I walked around the house again. I was lucky. I was very lucky. If I had cracked their skulls, I probably never would have gotten the house in order. As it was, I never used the plastic sheets. Sunday night, my parents brought the kids home, and I had time to make dinner for 5. What was it? Cheeseburgers and root beer, of course. Mom commented on my good mood, and I simply replied, I had a free weekend, and now my sweethearts are home. Mom asked, when is she coming home? Hell knows, I don't really care. That was all I said and all she needed. On Monday, I called in sick and took boxes of her clothes to Goodwill stores in several neighboring towns. I threw her cosmetics in the public dumpster in a bag of kitchen trash and her jewelry in another bag. The latter was hard to do, but I figured that's where I might stumble. Besides, I had long since stopped giving her jewelry, and what I threw away was just further proof of her many betrayals. I figured it would be a few days before her employer called to inquire about her absence. 2 went by. I told them I hadn't heard from her. I then took the one gift she had left me, which was true, and went to the police station to fill out a missing persons report. When they questioned me as to why I had waited so long, I told them the sad story of my wife's long-ago betrayal and how I thought she was just distracted by something else. I told them I wasn't alarmed until I got a call from her employer. They asked what her current boyfriend's name was, and I just stared at them. I did my best version of, you must be dumber than shit, and finally said, do you really think I want to know his name? I decided a long time ago that she has her own life, and I have mine, and I will divorce that whore when my kids are grown. I think they accepted my answer. 2 weeks later, they came to me and told me that as far as they had been able to find out, she had run off with her next suitor. I just nodded, said, bon voyage, and ended our brief conversation by saying, if you find her, would you mind giving me a heads up? They seemed to appreciate the joke, and I never saw them again. That was 5 years ago, and those were the 5 best years of my life. I waited a year and got divorced, claiming I had been abandoned. The kids asked about their mother a few times, but seemed content that she was gone and didn't shed a tear. Yes, I admit that every time my water is sucked out of my tank, I get a little worried. But I guess the flesh rots and the bones stay at the bottom. I offer a prayer of thanks that they were naked when I disposed of them. The last thing I need is for a shirt or pants to float up and clog the truck pump. I would have a hard time explaining that, unless, of course, the owner of the truck is divorced. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom. I have never enjoyed a bath as much as I do now, and as I flush the toilet, I imagine my present flowing down the pipe to the final resting place of my cheating whore and her latest distraction.